Hey boys and girls, my name is Miss Schwartz. Today I'm going to read a story for you called The Fish House Door. It was written by Robert Baldwin and illustrated by Ashton Shekels. Before we start, I wanted to read a quote on the back of the book to you guys that you can keep in mind while we're reading. It says, "Sometimes if you see something every day, you don't realize how important it is to you until a stranger tries to take it away." So this book is about a lobsterman and his son, and I'm sure you can maybe make a prediction based on the title as to what that really important thing that you see every day could be. Let's get started. I was steering my dad's lobster boat up the channel while Dad leaned back against the pilot house after a morning of hard work. As we idled through the harbor, I saw someone standing on our dock. I couldn't tell who it was, but from the way he stared at the door of our fish house, I guessed he must be a new summer person. He greeted us on the wharf. He was wearing clean, faded jeans and a sweatshirt, and said his name was Mr. Bruckner. He wanted to buy a couple of lobsters. "What size?" Dad asked. "Big enough for 2 hungry summer people," Mr. Bruckner said. He didn't ask the price. I climbed down to the float, hauled a crate of lobsters from the water, and grabbed a pair that looked about 1.5 pounds each. They thrashed about, waving their banded claws and snapping their wet tails. $15, Dad said. "Got something to carry him in?" The man shook his head. "Good thing you don't want more than 2, Dad said. With a lobster in each hand, Mr. Bruckner walked up the path toward the main road. Before he'd gone 50 yards, he turned and waved a lobster in the direction of our fish house. "I like that door," he said. "Yeah," Dad called back. "It's a good door." I looked at the paint-smeared door, blazing red and yellow in the afternoon sun. Why, I thought, would a rich summer person say he liked that beat-up old door? The door was a mess. Whenever Dad or I painted our trap buoys or repainted the skiff, we cleaned our paintbrushes against it. I kind of liked it, though, the same way I liked the stink of old bait bags and how the harbor smelled at low tide. They all reminded me of our island. What I couldn't figure out was why a stranger would like it. When we got up to the house, I handed Mom the mail we'd picked up at the post office. "We had a new summer person," Dad told her. She didn't say anything and continued opening the mail. "He told me he really liked the fish house door." She glanced up and raised an eyebrow. "Well, shoot, Anne, that's not so strange," Dad said. "I kind of like it myself. And by the way, he pays top dollar for lobsters, too." "He better buy a lot of them, then," she replied. "The bills just keep coming and coming." I've never really known if my family is rich or poor or somewhere in the middle. Once when I was younger, my older sister Helen said we were poor, but I'm not so sure. Dad says we have everything we need, including a house and a dock that plenty of millionaires would love to own. But we do seem to have a lot of bills. By the time I went down to the wharf the next morning, the sun was already peeking over the trees. There wasn't enough breeze to stir the tops of the spruce trees surrounding the harbor. Most island men were already out hauling traps. The sound of their engines floated across the smooth water and into the harbor. A few others were at the island lobster pound getting ready. We'd hauled most of our traps the day before, so Dad decided he'd give the lobsters another day to find our bait. Dad was sitting on a crate surrounded by freshly painted yellow and red trap buoys. Every lobsterman paints his buoys a specific color and pattern so they can tell who owns each and every buoy. There were some old wooden buoys lying around that Dad sold to tourists, as well as some broken traps in need of repair, and small coils of rope measured out in fathoms. The air was dry and smelled of spruce and the ocean. I got a brush and started helping him paint. I was painting the next to last buoy when Mr. Bruckner stopped by again, this time carrying a bucket. "Be right with you," Dad said. Mr. Bruckner stood off to one side and watched as we dipped the tips of our brushes into the red paint and carefully cut in along the edge of the yellow. When we were done, Dad handed me his brush. I stepped over to the fish house and wiped the wet brushes back and forth against the door, transferring the paint from bristle to board. When I turned, I saw Mr. Bruckner staring at the door with his head cocked slightly to one side. "You an artist?" Dad asked. He grinned. "What makes you think that?" Dad didn't say anything. "No, I'm not an artist," Mr. Bruckner continued. "I'm an art dealer. I own a gallery." "I don't know much about art," Dad said, "but I guess Sean and I have done a bit of painting in our time. Oh, Sean." I nodded. "You'd be surprised how many summer people buy lobster buoys, especially the old wooden ones," Dad told him. "How about a couple for your gallery? Better yet, how about a hand-painted fish house door?" He laughed. Mr. Bruckner looked again at the door. "No thanks, just some lobsters will do today." After he walked away, I looked at the door, thinking how great it would be if an art dealer would really pay money for our old fish house door. I was doubtful, but Dad was a great salesman. He would have to be. Like the rest of the old fish house, the door had seen better days. It was loose in the joints, and the screws had pulled out some of the old hinges. It didn't close tightly anymore, and we latched it with a short piece of rope. The front of the door was smeared with years and years of paint, mostly yellow and red now, of course, but I could still see traces of blue and white. "Those were your grandfather's colors," Dad said. I can remember the first time I hauled one of his blue and white buoys out of the bay. It was my 10th birthday, the day Pa decided I was old enough to do man's work. The sky had just begun to get light when we dropped our mooring and motored out. The moon was setting. The air was chilly and damp. I was shivering, but I felt proud that I was finally going to haul traps. "Back then," he continued, "we used wooden traps and the harbor was lined with fish houses and working docks. When I wasn't hauling traps, I was baiting pockets for the other fishermen or helping repair traps in the fish house with your Grandpa Dick and Uncle John." "The door must have looked different in those days," I said. "It was blue and white mostly, with a lot more weathered boards showing between the paint streaks. You could still see traces of brown." Dad told me that brown and white had been the colors of Grandpa Alec's trap buoys, which were carved out of wood. Now they're made of foam. Grandpa Alec was actually my great-grandfather, but I never met him. "What was he like?" I asked. "Well, he wasn't great at fishing or lobstering, but he was a terrific boat builder and carpenter. Dad said there were 32 or so families living on the island year-round when Grandpa Alec built the fish house. There was even a year-round store. Nearly all the men fished, but Grandpa spent as much time building dories as fishing. He didn't get paid much for them," Dad said, "but there was a time when most island men fished from boats built by your great-grandfather, and, before that, his father. In the summers, the passenger ferry used to visit twice a week, but during the winter, people had to use their own boats to get to the mainland. We didn't have any telephones or electricity either. When the weather was bad, we were cut off from the rest of the world." During winter storms, I used to crawl into Grandpa Alec's lap in the chair next to the wood stove. While the bay exploded against the icy rocks and the tide surged down the harbor, he'd smoke his pipe and tell me about trips on the coasting schooners that sailed all the way to Portland and Boston and Baltimore. I really loved that man. When I was 8, we moved off the island to go to the mainland school. One day, his boat caught fire off Parsons Ledge. They never found him. What did he look like? What I remember were his thick, calloused hands and the color of his eyes. They were brown, just like his trap buoys. Every summer, Dad and his family return to the island, just like our family does. He held traps with his father until it was time to go back to school, just like I do. Someday, I'll have my own lobster boat too. Mr. Bruckner was renting the old Morris house for the whole summer, and we saw him 2 or 3 times a week. He would come by with his bucket to buy lobsters, sometimes just a couple for his wife and himself, sometimes a bunch for his guests. He often looked at the fish house door, and even took some pictures of it, but he didn't really mention it again. Then, one day, toward the end of August, just before he was going to leave, Mr. Bruckner asked if he could go out with us in the boat to haul traps. I suppose so, Dad said, as long as you're willing to stay out until I'm done. Actually, he was pretty useful. He even baited some pockets, and he didn't get seasick either. On the way home, I started thinking again about the fish house door. Before I took off my boots, I deliberately stopped in front of the fish house and studied it the way Mr. Bruckner had done the first day I met him. I pretended I was admiring a famous painting to see what he would say. Ah, yes, Mr. Bruckner said, the fish house door masterpiece. I looked at him to see if he was trying to be funny. He wasn't smiling. He had that look that summer people get when they want something. Dad must have noticed it too, because he walked over and began admiring the door with me. You still like that door, Dad asked. Still do, Mr. Bruckner said. I like the improbable combination of colors and textures. Dad didn't say anything. Look at the way the weathered wood shows through where the paint has peeled off, and the little flecks of odd colors. And look over there, he said, pointing to a bare patch of wood where Grandpa Alec had once sketched a boat design. It looks like some old boat builder once used this part of the door as a drawing board. And over here, someone added up a column of numbers, maybe selling lobsters to summer people. Mr. Bruckner sounded like he was the one trying to sell the door. You can't plan that kind of beauty, he said. It just happens artlessly. It's a simple work created by a simple fisherman, and it happens to be magnificent. Maybe Mr. Bruckner didn't know much after all. The door was just a door, and Dad was about to sell it for way more than any simple fisherman would pay. Would you take $500 for it? Mr. Bruckner asked. $500, I thought? Yes! I turned away to hide my smile as I ran my hand across the streaks of dried paint. Dad lifted his cap and ran his fingers through his hair. $1,000, Mr. Bruckner asked, but this time I barely heard him. I had noticed something on the door, a tiny patch of brown paint, almost covered up by the newer, brighter colors. As I stared at it, I imagined the eyes of my great-grandfather. I could picture him telling stories at the wharf and imagine the smell of wood smoke and pipe tobacco and the roar of winter surf. Dad stepped a little closer to see what I was staring at, and he saw the brown paint too. Okay, Mr. Bruckner, make it $2,000. I listened to the waves lapping the rocks under the dock. The bright colors of the door sparkled in the sunlight, and I couldn't take my eyes off of it. Every smear of red, white, yellow, and brown looked like it belonged just where it was. It really was a masterpiece. Sorry, Dad said. Mr. Bruckner shook his head. It's an excellent price. Dad was silent, but I knew what he was thinking. Mr. Bruckner, I said, that might be a good price for some simple piece of art, but this is my family's fish house store. We wouldn't sell it for $1 million. Now, would you like any lobsters to take home with you? Thank you, guys.